The Adventures of Buster Bear by Thornton W. Burgess. Chapter 3. Buster Bear is greatly puzzled. Buster Bear hadn't enjoyed himself so much since he came to the Green Forest to live. His fun began when he surprised Little Joe Otter on the bank of a little pool in the Laughing Brook, and Little Joe was so frightened that he dropped a fat trout he had just caught. It had seemed like a great joke to Buster Bear, and he had chuckled over it all the time he was eating the fat trout. When he had finished it, he started on to do some fishing himself. Presently he came to another little pool. He stole up to it very, very softly, so as not to frighten the fish. Then he sat down close to the edge of it and didn't move. Buster learned a long time ago that a fisherman must be patient unless, like Little Joe Otter, he is just as much at home in the water as the fish themselves, and can swim fast enough to catch them by chasing them. So he didn't move so much as an eyelash. He was so still that he looked almost like the stump of an old tree. Perhaps that is what the fish thought he was, for pretty soon 2 or 3 swam right in close to where he was sitting. Now Buster Bear may be big and clumsy looking, but there isn't anything that can move much quicker than one of those big paws of his when he wants it to. One of them moved now, and quicker than a wink he scooped one of those foolish fish out onto the bank. Buster's little eyes twinkled, and he smacked his lips as he moved on to the next little pool, for he knew it was of no use to stay longer at the first one. The fish were so frightened that they won't come back for a long, long time. At the next little pool, the same thing happened. By this time, Buster Bear was in fine spirits. It was fun to catch the fish, and it was still more fun to eat them. What finer breakfast could anyone have than fresh caught trout? No wonder he felt good, but it takes more than 3 trout to fill Buster Bear's stomach, so he kept on to the next little pool. But this little pool, instead of being beautiful and clear so that Buster could see right to the bottom of it and so tell if there were any fish there, was so muddy that he couldn't see into it at all. It looked as if someone had just stirred up the mud at the bottom. "Huh," said Buster Bear. "It's of no use to try to fish here. I would just waste my time. I'll try the next pool." So he went on to the next little pool. He found this just as muddy as the other. Then he went on to another, and this was no better. Buster sat down and scratched his head. It was puzzling. Yes, sir, it was puzzling. He looked this way and he looked that way suspiciously, but there was no one to be seen. Everyone was still safe for the laughter of the Laughing Brook. Somehow it seemed to Buster as if the brook were laughing at him. "It's very curious," muttered Buster, "very curious indeed. It looks as if my fish is spoiled for today. I don't understand it at all. It's lucky I caught what I did. It looks as if somebody is trying to, ha!" A sudden thought had popped into his head. Then he began to chuckle and finally to laugh. "I do believe that scamp, Joe Otter, is trying to get even with me for eating that fat trout." And then, because Buster Bear always enjoys a good joke, even when it is on himself, he laughed until he had to hold his sides, which is a whole lot better than going off in a rage as Little Joe Otter had done. "You're pretty smart, Mr. Otter. You're pretty smart, but there are other people who are smart too," said Buster Bear. And still chuckling, he went off to think up of a plan to get the best of Little Joe Otter. The end. Had any right to fish there? To be sure, Bobby Coon caught a few little fish there, but they didn't mind Bobby. Farmer Brown's boy fished there too sometimes, and this was always made Little Joe and Billy Mink very angry. But they were so afraid of him that they didn't dare do anything about it. But when they discovered that Buster Bear was a fisherman, they made up their minds that something had to be done, At least Little Joe did. "He'll try it again tomorrow morning," said Little Joe. "I'll keep watch, and as soon as I see him coming, I'll drive out all the fish, just as I did today. I guess that'll teach him to let our fish alone." So the next morning Little Joe hid before daylight, close by the little pool where Buster Bear had given him such a fright. Sure enough, just as the jolly sunbeams began to creep through the green forest, he saw Buster Bear coming straight over to the little pool. Little Joe slipped into the water and chased all the fish out of the little pool and stirred up the mud on the bottom so that the water was so muddy that the bottom couldn't be seen at all. Then he hurried down to the next little pool and did the same thing. Now Buster Bear is very smart. You know, he had guessed the day before who had spoiled his fishing. So this morning he only went far enough to make sure that if Little Joe were watching for him, as he was sure he would be, he would see him coming. Then instead of keeping on the little pool, he hurried to a place way down the Laughing Brook, where the water was very shallow, hardly over his feet, and there he sat chuckling to himself. Things happened just as he had expected. The frightened fish Little Joe chased out of the little pools up above swam down the Laughing Brook, because you know Little Joe was behind them, and there was nowhere else for them to go. When they came to the place where Buster was waiting, all he had to do was scoop them out onto the bank. It was great fun. It didn't take Buster long to catch all the fish he could eat. Then he saved a nice fat trout and waited. By and by along came Little Joe Otter, chuckling to think how he had spoiled Buster Bear's fishing. He was so intent on looking behind him to see if Buster was coming that he didn't see Buster waiting there until he spoke. "I'm much obliged for the fine breakfast you had given me," said Buster in his deepest, most grumbly-rumbly voice. "I saved a fat trout for you to make up for the one I ate yesterday. I hope we'll go fishing together often." Then he went off laughing, fit to kill himself. Little Joe couldn't find a word to say. He was so surprised and angry that he went off by himself and sulked. And Billy Mink, who had been watching, ate the fat trout. The end.